Right, so I'm going to teach you how to recreate this clip from Sunny V2. And what's good about this is it teaches all of the recent animations he's been doing with characters, like, for example, animating the ball bouncing and using Photoshop to expand the edges and everything. So to show you I'm not a fraud, I actually found this clip from YouTube on his channel. So we're going to watch it now and then see what I've created. So that's the small clip which I've recreated here. So let's get into how you actually do this. If you want to follow along, you can just search up Magic Johnson on Google and this image should come up. So essentially we need to take this image here and turn it into this. And I've separated out the ball, as you can see. I've separated out Magic Johnson there. So it's just the background. And yeah, that's it. So we need Magic Johnson as a separate cutout. We need the background fully like AI generated, so when we animate him, it doesn't have just like a cutout behind him, if that makes sense. And then just the ball, so then we can make it bounce. So that's pretty much what we're going to create, and we need to do it from this. Right, so what we're going to start off by doing is cropping the image, and there's a small face here coming just outside the image. And in the AI generation, this might try and make a person here. So just to avoid any of that, we're going to crop just so you can't see the face. You move that. And just move these borders and the face. So now when you press tick, now we're just going to crop it again and we're going to make the image bigger. Now we're just expanding the background because this isn't really enough to get a 1920 by 1080 frame. So we're just making the edges a little bit bigger to give us a bit more of a workspace. So now we're just going to click generate, and you can never guarantee with this AI if it's going to do a good job, a bad job. You just got to kind of hope that it does. So it might take a few goes with the AI, but you can eventually get something that looks pretty good. So I'm mainly just looking for a good generation of the arm, good generation of the background here, though it doesn't have to be perfect. Right, so what I'm going to do next is cut out the ball in his hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to select a mask. Now I'm just going to select out the ball here, and it's not perfect. We can just go around by holding Alt on the keyboard. You can erase anything. So everything in red is going to be excluded from the mask, and anything that's not red is going to be included. So we want everything but the ball to be red. Now I can make it a little bit more clear if I just change the color there. Now, this doesn't have to be perfect again, because in the animation you're not going to really be able to see it, but that's pretty good. So now I've cut out the ball. I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to go new layer. And if you want to rub anything out after, you can just come here to the erase tool and just do it by hand there. All these details would be important in doing a video, but this just takes a lot of time. So if you really do want a perfect animation, then that's something that you would obviously spend the time on. So we've cut out the ball. Now I want to generate his hand, because when the ball leaves his hand, obviously there's going to be nothing behind it unless we generate it with AI. So I'm going to select this rectangle box tool, and then I'm going to drag it about after his forearm so it knows roughly what it's generating. And we're just going to press Generative Fill and pray that the AI actually does a good job. So what I've done is I've just typed in the prompt hand, and it seems to be doing a little bit of a better job. So let's see. You know, it could work. That's something more like it. So now we've got something roughly that looks good. And I mean, you could generate for, 10-15 minutes and probably get a better image, but for the sake of the tutorial, this is good enough. So now we've got this. We want to drag it under the basketball. As you can see, this is kind of what we're starting to get at. Now, we're just going to mask him out. But first of all, this hand image actually isn't embedded in this bottom one yet. So if I was to mask him out, for example, it's not going to mask it out, if you see what I mean. It's two separate images. So all we need to do is press the top one, which is the hand, and hold shift and then press the bottom one, which is the background and everything else. And they should be both selected. And then you just right click and you go to merge layers. So now this is all one image. So now if we come up to select and mask, when we select him out, this is all one image. So to make our job a little easier, we can come up here to the top and press object selection tool. And this is just going to do a rough job of selecting him out. And then all we need to do is just come back in and just make sure that all this on his hair and anywhere that it hasn't got, we just fix. So we just need to come around here, fix this up. So we roughly have a good cutout of Magic Johnson here. So we're just going to go down to output. We're going to make sure that's on new layer. And we've now cut him out. So what we have here is Magic Johnson cut out, the ball cut out. And all we need to do is now generate the background in the middle part. Because if we animate any of these two things above it, you can see he's still below it. So it's not going to look very realistic. So all we need to do, we're going to uncheck both of these so we can't see it. And this is what we're working with. So what we need to do, we're going to come up to this rectangle tool and we're just going to select all around him. Let me get a bit closer. Select all around him and then just generate. What might help is if you select the rectangle and make it all the way down here, so it gets rid of this reflection, and then it may not try to generate a person. Should just generate the background. Okay. Well, I think the best generation we got was probably this. So we'll just stick with this for now. So now we've got our generation, sorry. We're just gonna merge these images again. So this is just the generation and the background. So we're gonna hold shift, we're gonna select both, and then we're gonna right click and merge layers. So now we got three separate images. We have the background, we have Magic Johnson, and then we have the ball. So this is all we need in After Effects to create the animation. So as you can see here, this is a bit more of a perfected version. But you know, if you want to spend the time to cut these out and get the perfect images, then you know, you just gotta keep going, keep generating, and eventually you'll come up with something good. But for now, we've got something pretty decent. So all you need to do is just save that and come into After Effects. Now I'm in After Effects and I'm just going to show you a little bit of the finished product just so you can see the sort of things that we're doing before we get into breaking it down step by step. So you can see we don't actually have many layers here and it's a pretty simple animation, but you can see here all we're doing is keyframes, keyframes, and keyframes. So it's all just about making sure that the velocity looks realistic and we're just timing all the animations. But you know, once you get into animating characters, it starts to become second nature. So let's get into creating a new project. So when you're creating your new project, you're just going to make sure that this is 1920 by 1080. And this is important because the image we've created is not 1920 by 1080. So we need to put it in the frame of 1920 by 1080. Now, when we import it into After Effects, you're going to see that it's going to look a little bit weird. Now, just select editable layer styles. It's going to look a little bit weird. It's not exactly fitting in the frame, but this isn't an issue. We can just decrease the size of this composition. And then once we finish the animation, we can make sure everything looks in frame and whatever. That's all to be done after we do the animation. So if you double click onto this, this is just a composition. You can see we've got all of our images here in After Effects, all to edit and animate. So to create this character animation, we're going to use this tool up here. Now this is called the puppet position pin tool. And what it's going to do is pin certain areas of the image and move others. So if I create one pin here and another here, I can then move his body. So you can already see how Sunny V2 is animating these characters. So to make it realistic, we need to obviously pin the areas that we want to move, because that allows us to move it. And we also need to create anchors, because if we don't create anchors, like for example, if we create one here and by the feet, the whole body is going to move. And obviously we don't want that. So what we do for this animation is we want to create one at the shoulder. We want to create something here in the middle of the body, something to keep it grounded on the floor. And then when you move it, less of the body moves. Might even want to create one here, another here. And you can see now when we move this, it's not moving the entire body. And that's what we want. You also want to think about how the body actually works. I mean, we're technically pinned to the ground at our feet because of gravity. So we create pins at the feet. You might want to do some at the knees or whatever, but don't create too many pins, because then you see if I do this, not much of his body is going to move. And this doesn't look real. So the elbow is going to give a bit of flex when you move the hand. So we're going to remove this. And because it's just a short movement, we're just going to keep this as the keyframe there. And then we're pretty much ready to animate the character. So I'm just going to get rid of the ball over here and create another keyframe at the hand, because as he's bouncing the ball, we need one there. So if we open up here, this should automatically open when you create these pins. But if you come down here and you go to mesh 1 and deform, you can see we got all these pins. Now, you can't really know what pin is which, so I like to name them and you can move them. So I'm just going to check which one is this. Now to check, I'm just going to move it a little bit and it should select it. So this is puppet 1. I'm just going to name this left hand. I'm not going to be using this. I'm not going to be using this. Or this, or this, or this, or this. So we don't need to name them. I will be moving this, however. So I'm just going to select it. This is pin 8. So I'm going to move it to the bottom or the top. Maybe the top's easier. I'm going to rename it right hand. So earlier I said about moving them to the top because it's easier, but that actually makes it so the pins don't work. So you want to move these to the bottom just so they're together. And then when you move the pin, it should actually operate properly. So rewind. We're going to create some keyframes just to move the hand slightly. As you could see in the animation by Sunny V2, the hand is just slightly moving. Like so. So we're just going to copy that. So we're going to roughly get the path of movement. Now I'm just using these values here to move it, but you can also just select the pin and move it. And it does give you a good visual representation of what you're going to get. So it's just whatever you're comfortable with. And we can see that's roughly the movement that was in the video. So we've got this movement. It looks roughly about the speed that we want, but maybe a little bit faster would look better. So I'm just moving the keyframes together. Now that's roughly what we're looking for. And then it just repeats. So it's just these probably copy and pasted after each other multiple times. So now we need to do the keyframes. So we're going to go to the graph editor. Now, as you can see, this movement is very linear and it stops very abruptly. So we don't really want that. So we want to create a movement that looks realistic. Now, things don't just spring into action. Things need to accelerate and decelerate in real life. So to make this animation look realistic, we can't have it like this, because that is not a realistic animation. It just speeds into the thing. So we need gradual acceleration and then deceleration when it stops. So we can do this in the graph. As you can see, we have a slope going up. It's getting faster and faster and faster. And then it slows down. Now that's a bit too steep. So if we just drag these handles, it's going to make the fastest bit a little bit slower. And that looks a little bit more realistic. So now we have that. We can just copy and paste these keyframes and then add that. So now we got 4 keyframes and it should just go back into the position and then do the animation again. So we need to go back into the graph editor because this doesn't look very realistic. You can see it just, there's no acceleration, there's no deceleration. So we can easily fix this. We just want another peak, sort of like how we did. And you need to select this corner here. If you don't do that, it's gonna move all the other keyframes, right? So you just want to press on the corner, and then when you move the keyframe, it shouldn't affect anything else. We're gonna create a realistic acceleration and then deceleration there. Now it's a little bit too fast, so what we're gonna do is drag this keyframe away. So it's gonna do the movement quickly, and then it's gonna slowly rise up, and it's gonna do it again. And we just need to play with this and see roughly where it looks good. Now that looks decent. Of course, you can tweak it. You can spend lots of time doing it if you really want to create a realistic animation. But it just depends on the purposes of what you're doing. But for now, this looks good enough. So I'm just going to copy these 4 keyframes by holding left click and just selecting all of them. I'm going to come roughly about this distance away. And then I'm going to copy and paste. And make sure that this keyframe is all good, which is not. So I'm just going to create another acceleration and deceleration there. So you can see we've animated the hand here. It looks pretty good. And now we want to animate. Yeah, let me get this back in the center. Now we want to animate the right hand, which is going to be bouncing the ball. So it's just the same thing really as what we've done, except this time it's going to be with the right hand. So let me drag this back to the bottom. Right, so you can see the right hand here. Now we just need to create a small animation so it looks like it's bouncing the ball. So I'm just going to do the same thing. Again, you can just select this and move it yourself, but I prefer to, oh, this does need to be at the top. Never mind. All right, so I'm just going to drag it to the top. It's the same thing, it's still there, just now it actually moves. So you can either drag it here or you can drag it with the position tool. I'm going to use the position tool just because I find it easier. And I'm going to see roughly what looks decent. So it only needs to move slightly. That looks pretty good to me. And now we're going to come back into the graph editor here. Now again, we need some acceleration and deceleration. So we're going to create a curve roughly like that. Now because he's going to be bouncing a ball, usually your hand is going to be accelerating more quickly at the beginning. So we're just going to offset this peak by dragging the left handle backwards. That looks more realistic. Now again, I'm just going to select both of these keyframes. I'm going to move forward a little bit and then paste them again. So the hand's just going to be dragged back up and then it's going to bounce the ball. So again, we just need to fix this middle bit. Remember, press the corner keyframe, create a realistic curve, and you can play with this to make sure that it looks very realistic. I mean, you can even just do it in real life. You can even do it in real life. Just think, okay, if I was bouncing a ball, how is my hand moving? Is it moving quickly at any point? Is it moving slowly at any point? And just recreate that movement. So you can see here we got something that's roughly starting to resemble someone bouncing a ball. So I'm just going to select all these keyframes. and then paste it again. So we got a good 8 seconds of animation here. And then I'm gonna select all these and go into the graph editor and then just fix any of these curves that have messed up slightly. So that looks roughly good to me. We got the hand moving there, and then we got this waving about. So we've got a rough movement of the hand, and we're gonna use this to animate the ball. And once we've animated the ball, then we can go back in and perfect everything else. But for now, we just need to know the tempo of how he's gonna bounce the ball, and then we can animate the ball to that. So for this, we don't need to use the puppet tool. This is just gonna be the position tool and the rotation tool. And if you press U after creating the keyframes on both, then it should open both of these up. I'm just going to drag these keyframes I made to the beginning. I'm going to go forward a little bit and I'm going to create the ball animation. So the hand starts about there, but I'm going to move the ball roughly about there, just a little bit down. I'm going to come to this keyframe where we animated the hand, and I'm going to move the ball down to the floor. So you can see this is what we got. Now you got to think, when you drop a ball in real life, what does that movement look like? So I'm going to drag my left click, select both, go into the graph editor again, and I'm going to think, how does a ball move in real life? And I'm just going to try and replicate that. So it's going to have quite a sharp acceleration at the beginning because of gravity, and he's pushing it down. And then it's going to decelerate quite hard once it hits the ground. So I'm just going to play with the graph editor, see what works, and go from there. So obviously this looks a little bit slow. So we can just drag these keyframes together. That looks a little bit more like a bouncing ball. It's pretty much just playing with these keyframes, seeing what looks most realistic, and then going from there. If it's looking a little bit too quick, you can drag the keyframes away from each other, which will make the animation longer. And then, you know, if that's what you need, then go ahead. So that's roughly looking like a ball is bouncing. So all we need to do, copy, paste, and see how it looks now. Okay. So a ball is not going to be moving upwards that slowly. So we need to come back into this graph editor and change it. So it's going to have quite a sharp acceleration up here. Roughly looking pretty good. Now, the ball's spending a little bit too much time in the air and it doesn't look very real. So we're just going to drag these keyframes together closer to this and perhaps bring the hands closer together. So all this happening is the ball's going to move upwards more quickly and the hands are going to move upwards more quickly. So the animation overall is going to be much quicker. Now you can see we're roughly starting to get a good animation of someone bouncing the ball. And all that's really left to do is to copy and paste all these keyframes here. Create a realistic gap, roughly the same. Drag these, we just match it. Pardon me. This is the hand animation, this is the ball animation. I'm just making sure they happen at the same time. Because if they're offset, then obviously the hand is going to move when the ball isn't. And that doesn't look very real. So I'm just going to bring it back. And you can see they happen at the same time, which looks pretty good. Now what you might find is the hand appears that it doesn't move as the ball is. So what might need to happen here is that we slightly offset the ball's movement by 1 or 2 frames. So the hand moves first and then the ball moves. And it just might be needed in case it looks like the hand is moving after the ball. We let that load. You can see it roughly looks pretty good. Now, the keyframes in between the ball's movement, so you can see when it's moving back up, it looks a little bit weird. Now, that's because when we copy and paste, these don't look how we want. And you can see this doesn't look how we want. So we just need to drag these handles again to make that curve that we want. Roughly like that. And if it occurs too quickly, we just need to, or too slowly, sorry, we can just drag these together and the animation will occur faster. Now, this isn't a perfected version of this animation. As you can see, this animation can look a lot more perfected. But of course, this takes time. But you essentially have all the tools you need in order to make this perfected. And all this is just tweaking the keyframes, making sure that they look realistic. And you know, that is just tweaking. It's just trial and error until you find something that looks good. But essentially, all the keyframes and all the things you need to know about creating a character animation is the same. Now, all I did was just add black and white to the background, a blur, which is all doable. All we need to do, add black and white here. Black and white color correction to the background. Add a Gaussian blur. And you roughly got what you're looking for. And of course, there is camera movements as well. But this is very easy. And if you want an even easier way of doing it, you can just use... If you want an even easier way of doing it, you can just use the position keyframes here. Although you can also use the 3D camera. It's just up to you on your skill level, if you know how to do it, if you don't. But here you've got the basic character animation. And this can just be applied to any body part. You might have someone moving their arms, someone moving their legs. It's just all using this puppet. My voice is dying. It's just all using this puppet tool here and creating keyframes, making them look realistic. And yeah, that's pretty much these character animations. And of course, all the AI you need to do to create the background and stuff, that's all applicable to anything else. So they might have an image where you start off with just something where it's not this, either it's not 1920 by 1080 and instead it's small like this. You can create a background which is the frame you need. And yeah, so that helped you out. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.